Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being at the American Enterprise Institute to talk about artificial intelligence, because we all love to talk about it every day. So we get another opportunity. My guests today on this panel are Pablo Chavez, a technology policy expert who I've known for a really long time. It's a great time.
By the way, you don't age. It's incredible.
I actually walked into Senator McCain's office, and I had a job where I had to generally explain what I did, and he said, I worked at Real Networks. So I was like, cool, and we just bypassed like the first paragraph of what I needed to say. It was fantastic. But he's a technology policy expert, an advisor, a publisher, author focused on critical digital technology matters ranging from artificial intelligence to cloud computing. He is currently a member of the board of the directors of the Open Technology Fund and an adjunct senior fellow with the Center for New American Security Technology in the National Security Program, contributor to Lawfare and the Center for European Policy Analysis, and an advisor to corporations and other organizations on technology policy matters. So that's the short form. There's a lot more of that on the internet. And Chris, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Chris Messerol is the executive director of the Frontier Model Forum, used to be a neighbor next door at Brookings. He's an expert at AI safety, international governance, and global cooperation. He is currently focused on the development of standards and best practices for AI safety and evaluation, particularly in the advanced models whose capability is whose capability profile remains unknown. So thank you, gentlemen, and I look forward to today's conversation. So Chris, let's start with you, because you were kind of the front runner that this AI thing was starting to get real, and you ran off and got a real job. So the Frontier Model Forum has kind of 3 things on your website. So I want to start with those and see how it's going. So it's identify best practices and support standards development for frontier AI safety. AI safety is going to be a key thing here. Advance independent research and science of frontier AI safety, and facilitate information sharing about frontier AI safety among governments, academia, civil society, and industry. So you've got a lot of ground to cover there. How's it going?
Pretty well. First, though, it's great to be back on Mass Ave, and thanks so much for hosting this great event. I think what all 3 of those parts of our mandate and mission have in common is this kind of core challenge that we were created to effectively tackle and resolve. And so before getting into those kind of what we're actually doing, I think it's probably worth stepping back and trying to understand exactly what the purpose is for why we're trying to tackle those issues in that way. And the core challenge here is that we're kind of on the precipice of developing an emerging general purpose technology that's fundamentally different in many respects than prior versions of general purpose technology like electricity or the internal combustion engine. And one of the main differences is that with prior versions of general purpose technologies, as we were developing them, we knew what it would do if we could build it. We just weren't sure if we could build it, or at least we weren't sure if we could scale it out. The uncertainty was on the engineering side, not on the capability side if we could build it, because those were technologies where we basically understood the physics and we could use closed forms equations to understand what the thing is that what we were trying to build would do if we could build it. With general purpose AI, it's actually the exact opposite problem, where we've started, we have kind of realized, especially over the last decade, that if we, engineer systems that pump a lot more data and a lot more compute through some algorithms that have been around for a while with, some tweaks here or there, that we're able to get, orders of magnitude better capability jumps on the back end of those systems. And that puts us in a very unusual position where we've learned how to engineer this, but we don't actually know what it's going to do after we do a training run of a next generation model. And because we don't know exactly what the capability profile will be, we also aren't entirely sure how to assess its safety. And so, to understand how to assess its safety, you have to understand what the capabilities are of that model. Then you have to understand a way to evaluate those capabilities. Then you ultimately need kind of ways of mitigating any concerns you might have. So that's kind of the core challenge that's at the center of this technology and a lot of the different policy and safety discussions around it. And what we're trying to do with the Frontier Model Forum is break off different pieces of that challenge. So our best practice work is to try and work with firms at the frontier to understand, as they're learning how to do this on their own, provide a forum for them to be in conversation with each other, and in particular with the safety experts in each of the firms to be in conversation with each other, to hear a little bit more about what's working, what's not working, what generally speaking is probably the best way to identify capabilities and evaluate risks with the system. The second kind of thing that we're really trying to do is advance as much as possible just the scientific community and consensus around the capabilities of these systems and how to identify them, as well as, again, evaluate and assess the risks of these systems. And, long term, what are are there ways of technical breakthroughs that we could potentially fund on the scientific side that would ensure that these systems do exactly what we want them to do? And then the third piece of what we're tasked with doing is, it's hard to, that broad challenge that I laid out at the beginning, it's hard for us as a society to get to a good place there if we don't have accurate information flowing between industry and the public and government stakeholders about, what the, capabilities of these systems are, again, what seems to be working and not. And so our kind of core missions are all related to a very particular kind of challenge. Thankfully, I think it's been, to your the question you posed, I think it's been going fairly well so far. We're still a new organization. We're about 6 or 7 months in, so we've got a lot of kind of growing and building out to do. But we've made progress, and I would say meaningful progress in each of those areas, and we're excited to continue working on them.
At the beginning of that conversation, I was thinking about the probability, right? When the engineers are saying, well, I think I always want to bet on which elevator's coming down first. So I'd be trying to do a probability pool right away. So do you think it's going to maim somebody, or what's going to go on here? So the two challenges that you've really had quite a bit with is the idea of transparency, and then accountability, which is important, but also explainability, and that goes to that kind of probability question of here's where we're trying to push it to go, and the chances of it doing that, and then when it doesn't, it's here's the anomaly and why it didn't. And to explain that from a scientific perspective to a bunch of people in the government must be fascinating, because you're it's our best effort is saying this is what's going to happen. Every once in a while, it decides to do something else.
It's a unique challenge. For those who are coming to AI and kind of equate AI with different forms of software in the past, I just kind of preface one of the real challenges here is the paradigm of AI over there's been a number of different paradigms over the last 50 or 60 years since computer science was developed. The one that won out and proved most effective with AI is based on machine learning and is inherently probabilistic and statistical in nature, as opposed to other forms of what's called symbolic AI or other forms of deterministic software, where you know exactly what the program is going to do because you programmed it yourself, and you can therefore write meaningful tests to understand it better, and you understand how to explain that software because you wrote it, it's doing exactly what you told it to do. With machine learning systems, and in particular with some of the largest machine learning models that we have, that are being built now, these systems are so vast that it's very difficult to understand exactly what's going on under the hood. So there's a few kind of things that we need to do. One is to, at a technical level, at least make some breakthroughs and progress in terms of understanding. And thankfully, there's been, even in the last few weeks, some really important and exciting research that's come out in the interpretability space. But more broadly, I think we also need to start positioning our kind of broader policy debates around AI on the assumption that we might not be able to always understand what's happening. And the good news there is there's actual prior art to draw from. So for an analogous domain would be something like drug development, where we have all kinds of drugs that we don't actually know why they work, but they work, right? And what we did was we built an apparatus or a testing regime around the drug development sector that enabled us to have confidence in how these things would behave at mass scale. What we need to do in AI now, I think, are start to explore what are the appropriate guardrails and policies and frameworks that allow us to take the benefits of these systems, even if we don't get perfect insight into being able to explain exactly how they work all the time, and still make it safe for society to use. And I think that's very much within reach. Frankly, we've already built, any kind of governance of human beings has the same kind of challenge, right? We don't actually understand the human brain fully well, and yet we've still been able to, I think, build out decent governance structures for how human beings should interact with each other. And I think we need to do a bit more thinking in that vein around AI as well.
So, Pablo, bringing you into this conversation, there are a lot of people gotten into this really quickly, I think not completely understanding what the technology was up to, but they wanted in on the game. Right. So all of a sudden, everybody had an AI team running around, and you've heard me ask this question before, but so we had Bletchley last fall, G7 came in right after that. You just came back from Korea, which was the second tier on the AI Safety Summit. The OECD has been working on this for a while. We have GPI. Now we have the UAE and the Saudis coming in on this, and there's all these different things. Well, we got Schumer, the Schumer roadmap that just came out. So where are we seeing agreement amongst these entities? Because they're not all governments. Some of them are a collaborative effort. And it seems to me there's about an 80% agreement rate if you just kind of read their highlights. But what's the delta? Where is it that we're seeing the disagreement and the possible conflicts in these multi-stakeholder programs?
So first of all, again, thanks for the invitation, and thanks to AEI for hosting. Chris, you all have been doing a tremendous job. If you haven't seen it yet, you can actually go to the forum's website, and there's a lot of literature, including kind of a really great analysis that I recently read on red teaming that you should take a look at. And I think that, that topic kind of gets into your question, Shane. So, first of all, just kind of at a high level, we have moved over the last 5 years from generative AI technology that essentially can maybe produce a legible paragraph to something that is now, producing movies, songs, dissertations, all kinds of content that we just had not seen, and that has really kind of moved tremendously fast. Now, the interesting thing about that to me is that, in the past when we have kind of had paradigm shifts in technology that has driven technology policy, so the internet broadly, the mobile web, kind of the issues that came out of Web 2.0, cloud computing and so forth, there's usually been a little bit of a pause kind of between the kind of uptick of the technology and the action and interest of regulators. In this case, we're actually in a moment where, in a lot of ways, the kind of regulation and the technology are almost moving in parallel, where you see kind of a lot of regulatory and legislative efforts that are being set in stone even before the technology has had a chance to kind of fully evolve and breathe. Now, in terms of the kind of alignment question that you're asking, to me, I think you kind of need to distinguish between kind of legislation and regulation, and a lot of the work that Chris and others are working on, which is ultimately about measuring, explaining, researching, collaborating around ultimately what will turn out to be, kind of standards and, and generally understood thresholds of performance or risk. And so essentially, where I think that we are finding alignment is in that middle ground of research and standards, that kind of glue between the technology and ultimately the regulation. I think that there's been a tremendous amount of good work through organizations like Chris's, through the emerging international AI safety institutes, which I'd love to talk about in this panel. And there, I think that we are reaching some form of consensus. Legislatively, candidly, I think that it's a little bit all over the place. So we have had the European Union move forward with the AI Act. So essentially, they came out with a risk-based form of legislation that, in many ways, kind of left the details to later. So we'll see what the details ultimately look like. The U.S. has taken a different approach. The U.S. is really over the last 6-7 years has legislated every year, has kind of promulgated executive orders and so forth that have kind of laid down the foundation for governance. But nevertheless, in the U.S., we also see at the subnational level a number of pieces of legislation moving forward. So Colorado just passed an AI safety bill that diverges both from the European Union's AI Act as well as some of the federal proposals. California is right now in a moment of thinking about passing legislation that would include, for example, a kill switch for artificial intelligence products. So on the legislative front, I think that there's divergence. On the safety front, I think that there's a little bit more alignment and convergence.
Makes sense. The other part that you have been writing about and discussing is another challenge of sovereignty. So there's this element of a lot of the models are trained in English, and there's a lot of concern for multiple reasons that somebody might get left behind, right? So, I was listening to a podcast you sent me about how Singapore is doing Sea Lion, and I'm not going to know what that acronym stood, but it made sense when I heard it. That they have like the top 11 Asian languages that they're training on, right? So they're just like their fear is sort of like the internet that started in ASCII characters, and it just took a while for us to get to other native. Like everybody come our direction. So, is that part of the concern as well? Is like nobody wants to get left out by the nature of how the technology grows, and it's too kind of I'll say English language centric.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, because if you want to take kind of like a fuller look at essentially kind of like the geopolitics of AI, you've got the regulatory and legislative efforts, you've got kind of the safety efforts that people like Chris are leading on, and then there's essentially the competitive side where countries and nation states are thinking about developing their own AI stack, or at least developing kind of somewhere in the AI stack layer, model, launching their own data centers or high performance computing clusters, using data strategically, using energy strategically, and so forth. And so that is definitely an area that a lot of countries are looking at, for good and ill, candidly. So just to one positive example is Taiwan. Taiwan has developed its own large language model. It's called Taide. It's trusted AI. I forget what the D stands for, but Taide. And so essentially, what the Taiwanese are doing is the Taiwanese government is doing is they took Llama, an open source model, they fine-tuned it, it cost about $10 million, and ultimately fine-tuned it with government data as well as with Taiwanese media data. And what they want is they want to have a little bit of a plan B to kind of counter the AI chatbots that are coming out of China. So, for example, ErnieBot from Baidu. If you use that chatbot in Taiwan, you can ask it, for example, who's the new president of Taiwan? It'll give you the right answer, but then it'll append the analysis that it doesn't matter anyway, because Taiwan and China are one country. And so you can see that some of the sovereignty efforts are absolutely about kind of like maintaining democratic principles, maintaining control against that kind of like foreign competition. And so so you're seeing kind of that kind of development on the sovereign front.
Are we also seeing interest or maybe challenges on where capital is flowing because of where we're seeing the progression in these models?
Definitely. So, if you think about the different sovereign strategies that countries have taken, actually, Chris and I were just talking about this before we came on the stage. There's essentially kind of a number of strategies that the governments have been taking. And I mentioned the kind of the AI stack that's being built by or components of the stack that's being built by governments. But one thing, as you point out, is capital. And so, for example, the French government, which is very, very interested in developing AI sovereignty and its own AI sovereignty models, is now focused on committing a tremendous amount of capital to the development and deployment of these models. Another component that falls outside of the tech stack but is really important is talent acquisition. And so, the French, the UAE, other countries are very, very focused on bringing in AI talent and making it a lot easier for them to do that. So, the bottom line is that, it used to be, I think, the case, and perhaps in some people's minds it's still the case, that, AI competition is this kind of dyadic competition between the United States and China. But the truth of the matter is that there's a number of other countries that are trying to participate and that are participating in one way or another. And again, it kind of brings into the picture this other dynamic in addition to legislation, regulation, and safety efforts.
Chris, any thoughts on that?
Not too much. I mean, other than that, I think that it'll be really important to align, as was just said, like very important to align on the different kind of safety mechanisms that you see different countries pursuing. I think especially as, the one element that wasn't discussed was kind of the energy requirements for some of these systems. And so, as these things become more and more energy intensive as well as data intensive, you'll start to see training kind of migrate towards areas where it's cost effective to train with large amounts of energy. I think as someone who's focused on safe development of AI, it will really matter like what kind of safety measures and policies different jurisdictions have in place to ensure that as we're building out these really robust systems, that's done as safely as possible.
So, Paulo, you mentioned the AI Safety Institute. So how are they doing? Are they being well received? People flocking to it? Excited about what's going on there?
So, Chris, you probably have a lot to say about this. I kind of speak about it more as kind of like an outside observer and an analyst. By the way, it's a Taiwan AI discussion engine. I'll come up with the right answer in a little bit. But as far as I can tell, originally with the UK AI Safety Summit, which was November of last year, it was a little bit unclear, kind of like what the British government was trying to do with that. I mean, there was some talk about, essentially trying to set up an infrastructure where, effectively, just like, there's crash testing institutes for automobiles, there would be something similar for AI. And, and the jury was a little bit out about how that would all play out. Around that same time, the UK set up the first AI Safety Institute, followed shortly or almost concurrently by the US AI Safety Institute. The Japanese have also formed an AI Safety Institute. The UK and the US have now signed an agreement to cooperate between their AI Safety Institutes. Same thing with the US and Japan. Japan and the EU are talking about this as well. The EU will have an AI office that will serve effectively as its safety institute. And the bottom line, though, is that what seems to be happening is everything that Chris was talking about, in terms of like, kind of testing, evaluation, verification, validation, like, kind of the science behind, safety and so forth. All that seems to be kind of, the kind of like the gravitational pull seems to be in these AI safety institutes. And that could be good from a US competitiveness perspective, in the sense that you would find the alignment that Chris was talking about. Could be challenging in the sense that, perhaps this will all result in more difficult and, perhaps sometimes discriminatory obligations on US AI providers. But I think that more broadly, from kind of like a geopolitical perspective, this kind of lattice work of democracies putting together AI safety institutes is a kind of very good manifestation of trying to find alignment among like-minded countries to essentially develop AI in a transparent, responsible way, in contrast to perhaps what would be outside of that network of countries. So I think that's kind of like what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, just to build on that, I mean, I think I'd echo everything that Pablo was saying, but the one other thing I would add is like there was just there's the Bletchley Park UK AI Safety Summit last November. The UK announced that its Frontier AI Task Force was going to become what is now the UK AI Safety Institute right before that event, and then our Secretary Raimondo announced the AI Safety Institute at that event. There was an interim, there's going to be another summit in Paris in early 2025. There was an interim summit that just happened in Seoul about 10 days ago. There, I think probably the most welcome news that came out of that, or one of the pieces of news that I think was encouraging, was the announcement that the US and UK are helping to stand up a global network of AI safety institutes. I think it's one thing for each country to have their own safety institute doing kind of, appropriate, work to try and assure the safety of different advanced models. What is really needed, though, is a common framework so that you're not kind of it's intensive to do some of these evaluations. And I think what we need is somewhat similar to what you see in the aviation space, for example, where countries trust the safety, evaluations that happen in other countries, right? Like when I flew back from Korea, the US didn't immediately test the safety of the plane. Like it trusted that Korea had taken care of that. We need kind of versions of that within the safety ecosystem so that, there's kind of clear standards for how evaluations should be taking place, how they should be reported to each other. That'll evolve, I think, some MOUs and others between different versions of these safety institutes. But it's encouraging to see that there's at least a direction of travel here where some of that core needed infrastructure is starting to fall into place.
So there'll be metrics of which are understand they're common amongst the groups when they're reporting in, right? You're not having to explain it every single time.
Exactly. Like I think the worst case outcome would be, one country asks any firm like at the frontier to do an eval, and then every other country in the world that they operate in asks them to do the same eval because they don't trust other people's versions of that evaluation. Like that just is, that's going to be an untenable kind of situation, especially with respect to innovation, right? Because I think it's not always trivial to do some of these testing and evaluation, at least not to do it properly. And I think we'll need to be pretty efficient about how that happens.
So I feel like there's a lot of confusion sometimes in the policy space between the safety on build versus use. Mm-hmm. So the idea of like you've been talking about is like making sure that we're putting belt and suspenders around certain things, guide rails, but that's about kind of how you're creating the entity moving forward. And then I feel like when you talked about Macron at one point, it's like they want in on the build because they're concerned about not being in on the use. Like they're like, you're going to forget us. The French is still the international language of diplomacy. Make sure that you got that in there. So is that something that, am I picking up on that? Is that actually something that's important, or it's gotten stuck in my head?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's really important to distinguish between the development of AI and the actual, not just deployment. Like there's the development of it, there's the deployment on the cloud, and then there's the application that may sit on top of like some deployed version of a model on a cloud provider. And most of, like in the US, certainly we have a regulatory framework where regulatory efforts traditionally it's fairly tech agnostic. It's about a specific harm that a specific application is doing. Most of the effort that we're doing in the safety space is upstream of the kind of applications that people are using, the actual uses. It's about, for the underlying general purpose model, how do we make sure that that model is as safe as possible, irrespective of who's using it downstream, and like make sure that that model itself, especially as they become more capable and kind of able to carry out sophisticated tasks across a wide array of different intellectual activities, we need to make sure that that's as safe as possible. And then there's a whole separate question of like how it should be deployed and how the applications that are layered on top of these systems should be regulated and governed.
Any thoughts you want to add?
Just one thing, because I think it's worth putting a name maybe on kind of like this, this kind of multi-country kind of open rule-bound democratic societies effort. The State Department a few weeks ago came out with its new strategy that was kind of mandated by Congress in the most recent, second to last NDAA. And essentially what the State Department, the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy is doing is promoting essentially kind of the concept of digital solidarity as a counter to digital sovereignty. And so, all of these efforts that Chris is talking about, in terms of kind of like the 10 countries that have signed on, the kind of common standards, common measurements, and so forth, it is a manifestation of American leadership in this space, which I think is something to really kind of pay attention to and to really kind of see perhaps as a model for, how all this is going to play out over the next several years. I know that some folks despair, for example, about kind of like the direction of, kind of international trade and kind of, trade agreements and where USTR might be sitting right now on these issues. But what is the case on the ground is that, kind of perhaps those trade agreements are being replaced by these kinds of safety agreements. Perhaps those trade agreements are being replaced by agreements between the U.S. and its partners to build AI and cloud and other technical infrastructure, 5G networks, et cetera. So to me, I actually think that this is all tremendously exciting. And I think that what we're seeing too is this emergence of the world that Chris is living in, which is going to be critical to really establishing the rules of the road for all of this that's happening.
So let's move over to cybersecurity, because that's another element of concern, is that this gets unwieldy in the wrong direction. So how much of the safety discussions you're having are about that?
It's certainly one of the areas we're looking at. I would say there's we haven't, the FMF specifically, like we define safety in terms of the issue areas that we're looking at as threats to public safety and critical infrastructure. There's a whole array of other kind of debates that need to be had around societal impacts and certain societal harms. But we tend to focus mainly on public safety and critical infrastructure. What that means in practice is things like cybersecurity. There's also kind of bio risks and some other risks that we need to look at. On the cyber side, I think it's one of the things that is not kind of yet sufficiently understood in terms of the public is the capabilities that these systems have and what they'll have in the future, and like how quickly some of this might happen from here. Where I don't want to overstate it in the sense that we don't have systems right now that are capable of like fully autonomously, identifying and exploiting different vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure systems. I don't want to kind of overstress some of the concerns on that regard as far as like immediate systems. But what is in common, like what we're seeing is systems that are increasingly good at drafting code and analyzing code. Like you can, especially as there's something called a context window in these systems where you have a general purpose model and then you kind of upload a certain amount of information to it and ask it to analyze that information. When ChatGPT was first launched, these systems could handle a few thousand tokens at a time. We're now, I think it's only like 18 months later, it's like 1 million, 1.5 million tokens. Like this is only going to get exponentially greater, right? And so what you're able to do now is throw an entire code base against one of these systems. The chief information security officer for Anthropic, which is one of the leading kind of frontier ad labs, had a public Twitter thread about this where on the one hand, it's very helpful, right? Like there's a really good argument to be made that these systems might actually like improve our ability to defend against certain cyber threats, right? Because you can now take your effectively like a whole code base and put it through one of these systems and ask it to identify vulnerabilities that you might miss, right? The flip side of that, like the firms that are doing that, I think should be applauded. The flip side of that is not every firm is going to do that. And there are bad actors out there who can do that now. And so we don't know yet exactly where the offense-defense balance is going to kind of fall out or net out in terms of whether this enables greater offensive attacks via cybersecurity or whether it really more meaningfully empowers our ability to defend against certain attacks. But what's undeniable is that there's a whole new set of capabilities that have just become very cost-effective for a lot of actors that previously didn't have them. And I think we need to be really on forward-looking in terms of trying to understand that particular threat vector better, because that's especially when you think about kind of how AI might cause real-world harms in different ways. It's the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure is a big piece of it. So we need to, I think, do everything we can to make sure it's as safe as possible.
Agreed. I would just add that cyber is one to really focus on because with kind of chemical, bio, radioactive, nuclear, there is some debate about hey, you can learn a lot about kind of like developing a bioweapon, but at the end of the day, you still have to go physically find a lab and materials to use that. But cyber is virtual, and you don't need those additional kind of materials and abilities. So it is definitely something to watch out for.
Yeah, I love the idea of there actually being more offensive cyber capabilities because so much of it is in defense, right? And that's, it's one way to go at it, but it would be very helpful if more people thought about it as a good balance. So public trust is in a kind of an all-time low on tech at a certain level, which I love my social media companies, but they have not done the best by keeping up with some of the social challenges. I feel like AI is getting whipsawed by that. Because they're mad about something else, which is just kind of human nature is now they're going to pound the next thing that comes along. And I feel like AI is kind of, having that challenge. So what I'm personally concerned about is overregulation of the AI space that will stifle AI innovation. Am I being worried for no reason? You think I'm crazy, or do you kind of feel that from a policy perspective? I feel that especially in like the congressional hearings. Everybody's kind of like, well, not the hearings, but because we haven't had hearings on this so much as we've been like having special meetings behind closed doors, and now the House, I don't even know what the House is up to anymore. They're just doing what the Senate did. But there's like what they're talking about. I think they're talking about things that they're angry about from a while ago, and they're trying to self-correct. And I worry that AI is going to get tripped up because of that.
Well, I think that kind of a couple of things on this. So whether it's overregulation or not, I do think that the precondition and the precursor to effective regulation for sure is the safety work. And it just seems to me that this is the classic case of you can't manage what you don't measure. And so what exactly is it that we're regulating if we don't kind of fully understand? Now, obviously there are exceptions to that. Deep fake sexual images, things like that. Like you kind of put that to the side. But I think that there are other kind of regulatory matters relating to kind of capabilities and capacities that really do need the work that Chris and others are doing. I will say. I'm trying to figure out if you're defending TikTok. Is this your?
No, not at all.
No. I will say that.
All I'm just saying is when it comes to the kid point, they can't afford a $1,000 phone on their own. Just gonna say that. So, there's that issue. We can put that aside. I don't have TikTok on my phone. I hear that it's a thing.
It's a thing.
I'm a Reels girl.
So I think that as we look at the issue of regulation and trust, I guess just a couple of things. I mean, first, in terms of trust, in the AI space, enterprise software is very different from consumer-facing software, right? So a lot of the trust that's necessary for AI companies to be able to be successful will depend on the trust that other corporate entities have in them, right? So banks, hospitals, and so forth, and they tend to be massively good regulators of the behavior of tech companies. So for a little while, I was responsible for global public policy at Google Cloud. And in that role, I really saw just how kind of our interactions with banks, with hospitals, et cetera, really kind of drove a culture of like responsibility and trust. And I think that
that's because your client base had regulatory obligations.
100%.
Okay.
Because so there's this there's this supply chain and then there's this value chain, and so it all doesn't depend specifically on the provider of the model, whether it's Cohere or Anthropic or another. And in terms of overregulation, again, yes, I think that there are examples of that. But I think that perhaps one thing to look at is alignment within government to act in a consistent way. So, for example, what we're seeing right now, so the Commerce Department is very, very much kind of on the front end of all this, and and is working very hard on aligning around safety institutes and so forth. At the same time, it's promulgating rules on AI security that are kind of inconsistent with what we're doing on the international front. What I mean by that is, so again, there's coordination around these AI safety institutes, but there's a rule that's out there that basically says that American cloud companies should report any large model that's being trained on American infrastructure that has cybersecurity capabilities and could pose a cybersecurity threat. So that's supposed to be reported to the Commerce Department. And essentially kind of like foreign partners, allies, and so forth, foreign companies are like, well, hold on a second, what's going on here? On the one hand, you're talking, digital solidarity, and you're trying to kind of like get, all this alignment among allies and partners. On the other hand, you're kind of creating a situation where perhaps like foreign AI companies are not going to want to train on American infrastructure, or foreign countries are going to ask for that same kind of requirement, or we're going to undermine negotiations, for example, around the Cloud Act. And so I think that yes, overregulation is a threat, but just kind of like like bureaucratic organization and coordination would be very helpful.
That starts way before AI, actually, but it's it's a good thing. You can solve it at another point, and maybe AI is the one that helps get there. Chris, did you have some thoughts on that?
I would just briefly on the trust point. Like I think there's obviously the social media history, but the bigger issue is like I think Michael's going to be on the panel after this. We were on this AI commission together where we went around the country and just kind of had I think 5 or 6 different panels around the country. Listening to different concerns about AI, and there were 2 that really stood out. Like one was kind of potential threats to the job market. The other was as soon as that question came up, the next question was about the Terminator and like kind of like what would happen to us with AI. And
then
there
say
was
C-3PO or R2-D2. I mean,
I
those
know,
are the early
right?
ones.
Like,
don't you want your own C-3PO virtually walking around with you, being your ambassador?
And so, and especially given the nature of a lot of the conversation around AI over the last year, I think there's like a real deep-seated fear publicly about where AI might be going. I think we need to take kind of the core safety challenges, with due respect, but I think we need to do it in a way that's trying to foster public trust. And I think the last point that I'll kind of make is like we have an example of a technology that was really powerful, that could have really provided an enormous amount of societal benefit, and that we effectively like curtailed on trust grounds, entirely on trust grounds, and that's nuclear energy, right? Like it took 1 or 2 accidents. The public lost trust in the technology, and we haven't really seen any growth in that industry. And we haven't, think about where the climate discussion would be right now if we had effectively like an energy infrastructure that was carbon free, which is what, there's an alternate future where that's what we're living in right now, if you go back 40 years. And I think the trust piece of this is so critical, and I think why we are really eager both to kind of work on safety, but also start to communicate what that safety looks like out to the world. Because AI has some extraordinary capabilities that would help society, but to get that, we need to earn the trust of the public. And I think hopefully, events like this and others can help play a role there.
I know that the second panel will take on some of those questions, but I do think that another thing that I am concerned about is the evolving technology landscape and the regulatory process not aligning. So you get a lot of really interesting things going on, but it's especially in areas like Washington where they have a discussion and it's like they move on to another discussion and they're left this conversation. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Now all these things that we just talked about, like we've advanced. We've done things that are, and keeping them interested in the dialogue is...
I think it'll be critical, and I think on the safety piece of that in particular, we need to have alignment. To be totally candid, one of the things that's missing is an alignment on what safety means. Like what are all the safety, what questions of safety are all the AI safety institutes going to be looking at?
Isn't that why you're going around the world right now using a bunch of carbon to talk about it?
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of mileage plus points.
Just really quickly on this issue of defining safety.
You don't have to be quick. We have some time.
It is a critical point. So yesterday was the 35th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. As I kind of usually do around this time of the year, I kind of go to Baidu. I kind of do a check for variations on Tiananmen Square. Kind of like 6'4", 8 squared, right? 64. May 31 plus 5, June 4th. And invariably, you get nothing, right? You get pictures of Tiananmen Square. That happens, or has happened traditionally in the Chinese digital space because of safety concerns. And it's happening, as I mentioned before, Baidu's chatbot, the Ernie bot, is doing kind of similar things in the AI space. And so I think that from a policy perspective, from an American perspective, it's going to be really important to really kind of have a good understanding of what we mean by safety. And yes, obviously there are content moderation issues that need to be wrestled with. But our main competitor out there on AI has its own definition of safety that perhaps is going to bleed into kind of like the larger AI community. And so Chris's point about kind of like proper definition of terms and fighting around the edges of those terms to make sure that we are saying what we mean and we're understood to be saying what we mean, that's deeply, deeply important.
You bring up an interesting topic, though, because we see that around content and how the current models are responding to content. I feel like they're being very responsive. I mean, we had that early on with the poem, right? About a presidential candidate. I actually keep tabs on them because the other day I asked it to define some things around the Digital Markets Act, and it refused to say anything negative about it. And so then I fought with it. And then it said, you're right. And then it wrote what I wanted it to do. But, it's like, now it's become like a hobby. just to torture the different models. And I play with them all. So it's interesting. But the content capability, like you're
like
saying.
jailbreaking models and like.
No, if you tell it like it's wrong, it gets upset and it wants
Does AI know that you're like a black hat, prompt engineer?
That would be a fun little side hustle. I'll be like, I can get that. I'll get that down. The other thing is just critical infrastructure in general and the spend on this. So we're seeing, I feel like right now everybody's just like stamping boxes with AI, like, hey, it's AI enabled, this is cool. And you're like, no, that's just a regular thing that you used to do called a chatbot, and you're just putting AI in front of it. So talking to, and as you mentioned, it's mostly enterprises that are going to be doing this at this point. We're having fun as consumers being able to buy in on these subscriptions. How are we doing kind of, I want to say it's almost, I feel like it's a technical spend, but it's an emotional thought with the C-suite to prepare them for the changes they're going to need to make in investing in IT. I feel like this is something that's been a challenge for a long time in cyber, is that they wait until they're completely hacked or something terrible happens, and then they finally go, oh, I should have paid attention. The poor IT guy said 5 years ago, I tried to get you to do that. But AI is going to be a big lift of funding. I mean, is there good conversations going on about how to get to do all this really cool stuff, we need to be prepared? And then where is that? Is it going to be the cloud's going to resolve that because it's going to slowly migrate the price upwards, or is it going to be a big jump? What do you guys think?
Just getting a little bit out of the safety terrain here, but I think what I will say is one of the things that's really important for the broader public to understand is just the cost curve of training these systems. Mm-hmm. And we don't know yet how the economics of training is going to play out and all of that, but we've gone from a few tens of thousands of dollars of compute for something like GPT-1 or GPT-2 to hundreds of thousands to millions. The data centers that probably trained the current generation of model, there's ballpark estimates of around $500 million, and there have been estimates online that around the cost for some of these systems in the 100 to 200 million for like the training run that went into them. That cost curve, there's no indication that it's slowing down, right? So it's very expensive to train them, which means you also need to be training the next generation of general purpose AI systems is going to start looking less like a few people in a garage kind of like hacking on something together, which I think is like the typical model of like how we think of like a Silicon Valley startup, and more like, okay, we're about to build the Hoover Dam, right? Like it's going to require like massive new infrastructure in terms of data centers, in terms of the energy used to power those data centers. And that's a debate that I think ultimately, as the cost curve kind of continues to go, continues to grow, will become one that a lot of different public stakeholders are going to have some particular voice over. The other kind of plug I would make is the cost curve of like how to assure the safety of these systems as you're doing that is also something like how much cost to train these models do we want to spend on improving the capabilities? How much do we need to spend on
keeping them contained,
making them safe and like not exploited? And it's not, no one's saying like we shouldn't put any safety measures in place. And generally speaking, no one's saying, some people are saying we should shut it all down, but like that's a separate
Well, there's other people that are like, just let it go, open source
all
of it and let it go.
There's a real conversation to be had about like what the appropriate balance of spending and investment is there. And I think it's one that increasingly in the coming years we're going to have as a society.
Fascinating. All right, so we're going to open it up for questions. We've got about 8 minutes left. I don't know who I'm supposed to tell if you're in the audience. Are we doing Ask AEI on Twitter? Okay, so if you want to write something in on Twitter, it's hashtag, or it's Ask AEI, and then magically it should show up here. But
the lights are bright, but I think I see a hand over there too.
Okay, but we're ready to go. Okay, got a question. Start over here. Please tell us who you are and.
Sure. Thank you guys first and foremost. I'm Josh Levine. I'm with the Foundation for American Innovation. My question is for Pablo. Sitting on OTF, you guys have done a ton of really great work developing kind of technologies that promote digital freedom, like Signal and Tor. How do you guys see, or how are you thinking about AI playing into this? Is it creating open source chatbots that can tell people when Tiananmen Square happened and what it is? Is it compute infrastructure? Like, how are you guys wrestling with those questions?
Yeah, so a lot of so for those who don't know, OTF is nonprofit that is primarily funded by the U.S. government, and the purpose is to fund internet censorship circumvention technology and anti-censorship technology. A lot of the funding goes to VPNs, which end up being tremendously important in places like Iran, where there was kind of like a recent surge in use of the technology. Within kind of VPNs, there is increasing use of AI. Think about it as kind of a form of the cybersecurity thing that we were talking about, where it's like you're trying to kind of like navigate around kind of like gates and other barriers. So that is definitely kind of like an emerging part of the conversation. The open internet has been changing dramatically. How, for example, Chinese internet users experience life online is very different in 2024 from what it was 5-10 years ago. There's kind of a lot of use of like WeChat, et cetera. And so there's you can imagine kind of like the areas where you would want to focus in order to kind of reach audiences that want information from the outside and want to have a more holistic view of the world.
Other questions from the audience? We've just been so exciting. We've done it all. This has pictures. This has things for Gary Blumenthal, who's not on this panel, so I don't know that that's useful. Are either one of you monitoring questions from Ask AEI? There's none. Okay. All right. So then we'll go back to. I will keep asking questions until somebody wants to raise a hand. So we've talked about critical infrastructure and sensitive industries. Are there anything in particular you're seeing in the safety discussions on protecting these systems, or other than we're seeing possible like regulations, but are there consortiums that are starting, or like are industry verticals starting to think about this in a way that it's kind of like when I think about like when the internet started, like you had certain verticals that came around, or is this all just a big group? Anybody who's interested in AI, show up. We'll discuss this.
I think like in our case, the Frontier Model Forum, we're a industry body for just the firms that are actively pushing forward the frontier and are also committed to making sure that the models they build are safe. There are other, I think, industry efforts. There's Responsible AI Institute. There's the Partnership on AI in particular that's done some really great work on some of these safety challenges. There's Equal AI, which is also an industry body that tends to look at some of the application-specific issues related to AI. So I think like my sense is that trade associations that are and other kinds of organizations that are focused on particular verticals you'll start to see, if you haven't already, more and more kind of like domain-specific, sector-specific, industry-specific kind of best practices about how to develop and deploy particular applications for their vertical, but getting it right at the application level, I think requires kind of granular guardrails that are tailored to that application and to that domain. I don't know that you're going to have a world where there's just like one single set of like safety guardrails for every potential use case. Like I think a lot of the applications will really require some nuance, kind of thinking about what are the specific risks and harms you're trying to balance against with that particular domain.
I think that's a net positive, because that means that the people that know the most about their industry are thinking about it, right? So just
right. In the medical space, we want doctors thinking about
right.
some of that, right? I think like for a lot of same with finance, like we want people who really have domain-specific expertise in finance to help set some of the rules of the road about how AI should be used in those areas.
It's been one of our challenges early on. I'll take you a second, Owen. With privacy, data security is that the healthcare industry and the financial industry had regulations and took it very seriously. And then marketers started using all our information. We didn't have rules around the road on that, and now we're following other countries' rules around how to manage that information. So, I'm a big fan of the vertical. I think that there's certain things, the technology, but I always say you want to regulate the outcome, not necessarily the opportunity. To my earlier thing of saying sometimes we're going to advance this, and the regulation's going to be lagging in what we need to make it work correctly. Did you have a question?
Yeah, question here. It's Ronan Murphy here from the Centre for European Policy Analysis. Thank you very much, everybody. This is really about the trust issue. You've raised it there. Nuclear power is a really good example, Chris. I think you mentioned aircraft safety and so on. Shane, you mentioned that people are stamping AI all over everything at the moment. A lot of that is indicative of bubbles we've seen before, and a lot of money going into things that isn't necessarily going to return anything. How do we bridge the gap that's going to arise between a crash in value, for instance, firms that have taken on billions and billions of dollars in investment, and the obligation to report, the obligation to comply, whatever it is, with the rules or implement their own self-regulation? Because what we've seen in the past is when the money runs out, compliance departments tend to be one of the first on the list for culling. How are we going to protect against that, given that this is seen as a more powerful technology, potentially? Maybe it's by vertical. Any views on that?
Can I just ask Rowan a question first? So you mentioned that AI is being attached to everything. Is it true, is the rumor true that you've changed your name to Rowan.ai?
Don't believe everything you read on ChatGPT, stroke, whatever it is. But thanks, Bob. It's a good idea. I could look into it. Thank you.
Ronan also said something. We were having a discussion a couple weeks ago, and he said, because you came into this in compliance, was how you got into the space. And he said, once you collect data, there's no getting rid of it. And that has not gotten out of my head, by the way, because I was like, oh my God, he's right. Once it's there, it's you can't.
I would say, Ronan, one quick thing on this is that Shane was talking about the verticals. One of the key verticals is public sector, right? We were talking before about sovereign AI and kind of the investments that national governments are making there. And so I think that simply by virtue of that being kind of a key stakeholder, perhaps that's going to mitigate that risk of de-investing on safety issues. But that's speculation, and we'll see how it plays out.
Question over here. And we got one more here. So take you two, and then we are done because we've got to go to the next panel.
I'm Rick Steinheiser, government retired. Jeff Hinton, of course. So he and a lot of the scientists that have built AI systems for the last 10 or 20 years had this big letter that they wrote and signed about a year or so ago saying, we need to have a moratorium for a year on this AI thing because we really don't know where it's going. We who have built this thing, called AI in general, particularly Hinton, can't explain the results that are output, okay? And that's one of the big projects many years ago that DARPA was working on. I worked with DARPA a lot on this kind of common sense reasoning, explainability, and all of these unsolved problems in AI. So a year or so ago, Hinton and all said, we need to call a stop because if there are some real breakthroughs, we don't know what's going to happen. So has that been discounted in your various meetings and conferences and so on? From the scientists, I mean.
The pause, the question of the pause.
Yeah, I think that there's a question about, there's the explainability issue you're raising, and then there's the question about how pronounced the dangers are, and then there's a question about what to do about both of those things. And I think on our end, one of the reasons we are so focused on advancing the science and trying to engage with information sharing and the different safety institutes is, it is a really bold thing to say, we're just going to shut down development of a technology without a lot of evidence about A, what the risks are, B, whether feasibility of how it would work, et cetera. So one of the things that we're really committed to is we are worried about threats to public safety and critical infrastructure. That's kind of our core threat that we're trying to deal with. But the bigger picture in terms of the broader policy debate that's happening right now is that we are having live in real time like a really important debate about the trajectory of this technology. When there's uncertainty on how that trajectory is going to play out, there's some uncertainty on the risks. There's also kind of uncertainty about how dangerous some of these trajectories or capabilities might be inherently. The answer is we don't necessarily know, and what we do know though is we don't have a great set of metrics, and we don't have a good kind of scientific basis right now to make informed decisions about what the right and appropriate policy response is. And so I think to me it feels like we're at just a moment in the trajectory of AI where it feels premature to shut it down entirely. What doesn't feel
AI, and I was shocked to hear these people, many of whom I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, one of them was Elon Musk. Yeah. One of the advocates for the pause was Elon Musk, who then proceeded to form his own AI company
Right.
immediately. So
Say, hold on a minute, I'm getting my capital collected. I'm still working on my GPUs. Give it a minute. Yeah. I mean, I do also think that a lot of the work that you're doing is a response to the concern about the pause. I mean, it was it's good to say things out loud that you're concerned about, and then have people hopefully solve your fears. One last question right here, and then I promise we'll move to the next panel.
Hi, my name is Jeff Krasny. I'm with DMG Global. I have just a really quick question. Is Sam Altman the most important individual with respect to the innovation and continuation of AI?
He's really good at getting media. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I wouldn't say, I think that the continuation of AI is it's an industry-wide kind of effort. There's obviously particular firms and particular individuals who are playing, key roles within that. But to me, it's about, how are we as an industry and we as a society going to move forward with this technology? And that's the debate that I think is the really important one that we need to have.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists today. And give us...
Fascinating first discussion. My name is Brent Orell. I'm a senior fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute, and I spend most of my time thinking about workforce development, job training. Obviously, the question of how AI is going to impact work and skills, it's a critical one. It's always, is safety more important or is labor market impact more important? And they're both super important. I think a really important part of this conversation we're having here today is to try to get down from this very high level of abstraction, this important conversation that we just had about regulation and about, how do we deal with the black box of artificial intelligence and make sure that it serves us rather than harming us. So this conversation is really going to be with people who are, they're not at 30,000 feet, they're at 20, 10, 15, 5,000 feet. People who are really trying to figure out the translation questions between the technological development and the impact that it's having in various sectors of the economy. So we're joined today on this panel by, to my immediate right, Leslie Sizemore, who's the Associate VP of the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education, Boyan Tungus, who is kind of a man without a country at the moment, but most recently was a data scientist with NVIDIA. And so he has insight into the development of some of the technology and where that's headed. We have Mark Johnson, who is the co-founder and managing partner of the Michigan Software Lab, which is a consulting firm that works with a lot of companies across the country in helping them figure out how to use AI within their business operations. And then finally, Michael Richards with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He is the Chamber's policy director. He and I and Chris Meserole, who you just heard from, all got to know one another reasonably well on a commission last year on artificial intelligence. So we're going to, as I said, we're going to try to come down out of the clouds a little bit in this conversation and talk a little bit about how AI is actually being used. To get us started, I really wanted first to have Michael talk to us. What I asked all of the presenters to do is to give us like the short elevator speech that they have to give all the time about what AI looks like from their perspective, from their vantage point. And Michael, I'd like you to talk to us about both kind of the policy issues as you see them developing in the administration on Capitol Hill, and then also what are your members at the U.S. Chamber, the businesses that make up the U.S. Chamber, what are they saying and thinking about AI?
Yeah, no, Brent, thank you first for the invitation. Thank you for this discussion. Always great to be a part of anything AEI is doing, so thank you. So first of all, let's talk first and foremost about the policy landscape, kind of what that's looking like, what that means for our members, and kind of those specific issue areas. Those are actually really panning out the same issue areas in which the commission was pointing to during the final report, being first and foremost regulation. So there is an ongoing dialogue. The previous panel very much gone into kind of what that's looking like, but the regulation landscape is an issue in which we are very much having a robust discussion about right now within the United States and internationally and globally, as well as at the state level. We're also hearing quite a bit on the workforce. So part of the recommendations of which we got from the AI Commission were specific to the workforce. We've seen quite a bit of this discussion continue to happen, including in the recent AI roadmap from the senators, which really highlighted things like the need for immigration reform, things in which the commission was pushing for. We've also heard very much about the need for, global competitiveness, but United States' ability to compete continually on this landscape, make sure that we have the right resources here at home, be it the necessary compute, be it the necessary energy resources, those specific factors in which we need to have domestically to be able to compete. And then finally, just as the commission already put towards the national security aspects of it as well, obviously those are discussions that have to happen to ensure the landscape is robust and ripe enough for the continued innovation and use of the technology. But that being said, for our members and the utilization of the technology, For those who don't know, the U.S. Chamber, we are the largest trade association. We also represent over, I think at the last go-around, 3.5 million businesses. And that's everyone from the small businesses to the large businesses. So we really have a unique ability to really see things from side to side, be it sector to sectors. So the working group that I run for the Chamber has 33 different sectors represented within it, as well as every vertical as far as small, medium, large business. And one thing that we see over and over again is the benefit of the technology is really being showcased at the small and medium-sized level. And so the Chamber does a report yearly. The report was updated last, I believe, September, and came out around small business use of artificial intelligence. And it said this. First, it showcased that 25% of small businesses are already using artificial intelligence, and another 25% we're already going to use, or we're going to start using it within the year. So a good number of businesses were already using it. What are they using it for? Well, they said that they're using it for finding new customers, finding possible customers in the future, and then really marketing, advertising, and really different areas in which they can utilize the technology for growth. And what we did see within that same survey was absolutely astonishing is because I think everyone's thinking that it's going to take jobs away. Well, it actually showed the opposite. Is those who are actually investing in the technology and using the technology are the ones actually hiring, because they're actually able to grow exponentially and actually have the resources to hire. So it's something that we continue to look at. I'm really looking forward to the upcoming update to that survey, because I think there's a lot of things in which we really do want to say, because when we heard 25% of businesses or small businesses think or say they're using AI, I think that's actually off, because we're using AI on our day-to-day basis that we just don't even think about. How many of us are using Siri on our phone, using Waves to get different places in our car? Anybody who's running a virus software on their computer is using artificial intelligence. We're just not putting the two together. And I think that that's a story in which needs to continue to be told, and one that has to be told for this to be done.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, I really believe that we've all been trained up by Hollywood to think about the Terminator scenario, right? And in fact, AI only looks new for about 5 minutes, and then it kind of recedes into the background, and it becomes part of our normal everyday lives, making our everyday lives in many dimensions better, more efficient, easier, because it's there doing some thinking for us. Okay, so from here, I'd like Boyan, talk to us about, I mean, I remember I was in California on a trip when GPT-3 was released, and you and I were talking on the phone, and you were like, we were both like completely blown away about what we were seeing.
Yeah.
But I would like you to talk a little bit about what we're going to see next, if you could speculate a little bit.
Next, or the real next?
I'll leave it to you.
Okay.
You can give us both, actually. I'd like to hear both.
So, going back to when GPT first was announced and then GPT-4 came, the whole pace of innovation seemed to be just mind-blowingly fast. And it seemed to me like by the end of the last year, we're going to have full-blown AGI, and that's pretty much the game over. And things obviously did not pan out that way. And the big question is, why is that? And my understanding has more to do with the strategy of these big companies and how they're actually proceeding right now. Now that everyone understands this is one of the most game-changing technology probably in history of humanity, everyone has to have a much more thoughtful way of how they're going to proceed, both in terms of safety, which is what the previous panel was talking about, but also in terms of pure how we're going to commercialize this. If we move too fast, maybe we're not going to make as much money from all of this, or if we actually just jump into things immediately. My sense is that the technology that was released with GPT-4 was pretty much cutting edge, and has been cutting edge for about a year now. And everyone's kind of expecting this GPT-5 to arrive, which probably is going to happen at some point this year. So the question is what are the capabilities of this next wave of GPT? And my understanding is something that people have been clamoring for is more consistency. Again, we see that a lot of these chatbots can give you different answers if you just keep asking them the same question. More reliability, so all these hallucinations need to be curbed down. And finally, the big one that everyone is hoping for, like more agents. So the real agents that can actually perform tasks for you out of the context. So that's sort of what everyone's hoping for or aiming for by probably the end of this year. The big picture next is like when the real.
Is this the real next? Or was that next or real next?
So the big picture is like that, the big 8,000-pound gorilla in the room or elephant in the room, whatever you want it. It's when is the AGI coming? And the AGI, depending who you ask, is like this real human level intelligence that can pretty much do any cognitive task that we can do. And depending who you ask, it might already be here to some extent, or maybe just around the corner. And that is going to be an even bigger game changer in terms of both how this technology is applied, as well who has access to it. And that's where all the speculations start to kind of break down, because we really don't know what to expect when that comes around.
So that's the real next.
That's the big next.
That's the real next, is that we're going to have this thing that we don't quite know what it is or really have a clear sense of what it is, but it's going to, you talked about agents. And that is something that is going to dive into the middle of our jobs or our lives and actually take the initiative.
So, tell someone like, okay, find me make all the arrangements for my trip to DC so I can be at this conference, and just does it the way that you would like. Instead of like, I still had to go and like figure out like what's the best idea.
Does it have any idea how fussy I am about this though? I mean, like, making travel arrangements is so particular.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Like, there's something that right now you can probably write a script with a few lines of code that can do that for you, But to really make you happy, Brent, that's what takes like AGI level intelligence.
Okay, yeah, well, obviously. Okay, so Mark, you're working with companies, helping them think about, well, I don't know exactly describe this, but you're helping them think about how to apply this in their business processes. What's happening? I mean, Michael referenced the small and medium-sized businesses. You're working mainly with Fortune 500s, but what are they hoping for? What do they want out of this? What's their level of commitment to it? And what are the big obstacles for businesses that are thinking about applying AI?
Yeah, so when we sit with the C-suite with a lot of these large brands, I think there's a lot of anxiety right now, tech anxiety around these types of tools, because they're unsure of which levers to pull not to disrupt their core business. And so a lot of what we're seeing is kind of this crawl, walk, run approach, where they're starting with the crawl, like you're talking about, these simple agents and these simple chatbots. They're moving more towards the walk, which becomes these recommendation engines that really drive based on their database, and pricing engines to help make sure that they're reaching the full potential of their business and revenue. And then it moves into all the, kind of the far out there stuff that they're trying to work on. And so companies that are thinking, and their R&D departments are 10, plus years out. And so they're already thinking about some of these ways that, is pretty analog right now to interact with your device. You've got your thumbs, or you've got, your voice or your hand. Eventually we'll have, potential BCI, which is a brain-computer interface. So as computers become more like humans, humans are becoming more like machines in a way. And so these interactions that are moving more from analog to digital are going to be some of the trends that these big brands are starting to look out for. And so one big brand in particular is what's going to happen this fall with the new iPhone. And so coming out, and rather than having applications and kind of using this old-fashioned way of interacting with your device, it could all be integrated, and you might not need all these different apps, and it could already be logged into your banking system and already be logged into your health system. And
okay, so you're getting pretty close to home here for me, right? Like the iPhone has become an extension of my life, and you're telling me that I'm going to have an entirely different kind of iPhone. Yeah. What will that look like?
Well, in the same way that we learned what happened with search. So in the past, Google was able to pay to really have the billboard on the iPhone for search. the same thing's going to happen with AI, where a large company is going to pay Apple to have access to have these tools on that device. And so I think what we're going to see a lot in the enterprise is that these big brands are going to converge and they're going to start to continue to work together based on the systems that they have built out and the data that they have available to them. And so it's going to be a lot better experience than it is right now. Almost Siri can't get any worse than it is right now. I don't know if people try and use anything with Siri, but yeah, my daughters have this funny thing. They'll ask Siri if Siri can buy them an Alexa. And so I'm always like, you got to be careful. Don't make these AI systems mad at you right now, because who knows what'll happen.
So I still need you to be more specific. When I get my new iPhone,
Yes.
what's the screen going to look like?
Yeah, so the near, the next, and the later. So the near is still going to be a screen this year, but the next is really going to be these more interactive ways of connecting you with your device. And so it seems strange, but we think actually the least invasive technology will win in terms of BCI. And so groups like Paradromics are working on this. And really their goal is to connect your brain into these computer systems. And so you can think a thought, send a text. You and I could be texting right now if we wanted to. Hopefully that's not the case. I'd filter something out, But.
Yeah, how do I make sure that not everything that I'm thinking winds up in a text? Because that wouldn't be great for anybody, particularly me. Okay, Leslie, so we met 2 weeks ago in Louisville, Kentucky, and we were just at a reception, and a couple people from AEI who knew you said, you got to go talk to Leslie because she's doing this amazing thing. So tell us about the amazing thing that you all are doing with artificial intelligence, working with students and employers too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So my charge at the council is to work on workforce and economic development. And one of the things that we really are trying to do is to align what we're teaching from a post-secondary perspective for all the schools in Kentucky to what the future workforce is going to look like. So we have to really look at the fact that most jobs, probably 90% of new jobs, will involve having to have some sort of post-secondary credential. So it may not be a degree, but it'll start probably with a certification. So one of the things we've looked at is a program called Climb Health. It's career ladders in mental and behavioral health. And it starts with people with lived experience in addiction. So
They themselves are in recovery.
that's right.
Yeah.
They're in recovery. And as they are entering the workforce, there aren't many opportunities for them. Most of them have to go to work at fast food places or gas stations or whatever, particularly if they have criminal backgrounds. So this program allows them to enter post-secondary education at the certificate level, acquiring a certificate as a peer support specialist. And those specialists that can then be, after certification, they can be employed at an addiction recovery type center in Kentucky. And as they're employed, they can move along the pathway to gain a 2-year degree in human services, a 4-year degree in social work, and on from there. So the sweet part of this is that it's not just a beginning point, it's not just a job. It's a pathway in post-secondary education where people can achieve, they can be successful, and they can then contribute to society. They can feel value that all of us want to feel.
So where does AI come into this conversation?
One of the aspects of this training is to allow us to tap into AI at a pretty elementary level, really, using a chatbot. The chatbot is trained with a lot of documents that we have uploaded into AI that gives all of the information about what a peer support specialist does. So it allows these folks to get some training and some experience in counseling. And so they can go into mock counseling sessions with a variety of clients. and they can be critiqued.
These are virtual clients. They're kind of archetypes of clients,
Yes,
different
yes.
kinds of people that are struggling with addiction.
Yes.
And they get to, what do they do with the AI?
So they could say, I want to practice a scenario with a veteran who has an alcohol addiction problem. So they can then practice a counseling scenario. AI will critique them and say, well, you did great here, you could have done better here. Or AI could say, I'm sending this to your supervisor to get more information about how you could improve. This particular bot also guides them in their own post-secondary education journey. So they could say, I want to be a nurse, or I want to be a psychologist. And this chatbot would help them to know what they do step by step by step to be on their journey. It can help them learn how to pay for their education. It can reach out to gain them wraparound supports so that they're not just brought to education, but they're actually supported through that process.
So I just want to highlight this because, you know, we always start out these conversations about AI with, oh my gosh, it's going to take over the world. It's going to come in the form of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's going to ruin our lives, right? But what I hear you talking about, and why I was so excited about it, is that it's actually helping people learn how to be better sort of interpersonally with other human beings, right? So if you'd put that on my bingo card, I would have been very surprised. You know, like AI can help us become better people. That's really quite surprising. I know that this is just at the beginning for you all, but how are you going to apply this in higher ed and in the network of schools that you oversee?
So right now, 9 of our 16 community and technical colleges in Kentucky are CLIMB campuses, CLIMB colleges. And those 9 were identified because they are in the highest areas for overdoses in the state of Kentucky. And so students can actually access from any college the curriculum because it's virtual. But we plan to continue to expand upon this. We will give this, as soon as it goes through the pilot, it's going through the pilot now, we'll hand this over to our community and technical college system and allow them to utilize it. But we're also going to be exploring the role and the use of AI with other pathway developments as well, like community health workers, people to work with children with autism. You know, we have a huge labor shortage in Kentucky, not unlike the rest of the nation, but we have a low workforce participation rate, and that's something that we're hoping to change with more supports to allow people to be successful.
Right, so we don't have, we can't hire enough people to be the peer support counselors for everybody who needs a peer support counselor in Kentucky or in any state, really.
That's right.
And so this technology is, sort of permitting the extension, radical extension of this resource that, it's not one therapist working one-on-one with their clients. It's a computer that has all the best information about these challenges within it, and able to work with an unlimited number of people. Very, very exciting. And again, I would not, if you told me 2 years ago that this was going to be on the horizon, I wouldn't have believed you. So you look like you want to say something, Boyan. Did you want to?
Yeah, I think like 2 points. I feel like this highlights 2 areas where I feel AI is really going to kind of change a lot of lives very soon, even before the AGI arrives, which is mental health and education. As all of us know that there's still a lot of stigma associated with mental health, and people are not really willing to kind of go to a specialist even if they're available. And yet many therapies are fairly straightforward, like from cognitive behavioral therapy that you can kind of get there. So I'm very hopeful that even for like minor issues like weight watching, like, someone, you could have a weight watching buddy that's a AI that's kind of guiding you to achieve your goals, or like your exercise goal or something like that. So like very simple bots can actually potentially have a lot of effect on your mental health as well as your potentially physical health. And another thing is, in terms of education, my favorite kind of education is when you have a very closed feedback loop, which is very hard to get in most instances. Like, you go to school, you study for days or weeks or whatever, then you have exam, then you wait for another week before, it's graded or whatnot, and then based on the feedback, you either read it or not, and then you kind of learn something, hopefully. So that's the traditional way that the education system works. My best experiences in life were like where I have very tight feedback loop, where I try something and immediately get a feedback if it works or not. And that's one of the good things about working with machine learning models or data science. You have these brilliant ideas, and then you think like, oh, I have just this best idea that how I'm going to improve my machine learning model. And then you try it, and it's complete crap, and it doesn't work at all. And you're like, okay, this is very humbling, but I've learned something very immediately. And I feel those kind of immediate feedback, that's another reason why I'm big on social media. I get feedback all the time, most of which I don't appreciate, but that's the feedback. But, imagine having a school teacher who's like with you all the time, and you can do crazy things that you otherwise wouldn't even try with even your parent, maybe, like to try things out and immediately get feedback. And this is someone who's very patient, who can work with you 24/7, who can actually kind of give you feedback on very continuing basis. So these are two use cases for AI, which I feel are already very viable right now, that I'm very, very hopeful about.
Mark, do you hear much from your clients who are thinking about these kinds of applications in like human resources, or, like there's always a push for efficiency, right? Is there also a push for better, like?
Improving on what's already been established in terms of a process. So typically what we see is, it's either a top line constraint or it's a bottom line, constraint. And so determining, all right, are we trying to grow a new, digital business, or are we trying to improve, an existing operation? And so within an existing operation, it's, all right, resume review. Are there ways that we can automate some certain manual tasks? Or if you think about a factory system, and you have all these sensors, and could the factory eventually be a dark factory to where you wouldn't need to have, large human workforce there, or only for the most critical areas that are the most important? And so I think the enterprise is really eager to see, the levers that they're pulling, what's going to be that return on the investment. And right now it's still continuing to be pushed out because of, there's practical uses for this, but, how is it going to be perceived by their workforce? So one of the things that we're often saying is, use these AI tools as like a work colleague. And so a new work colleague, if I had a new work colleague start, they're learning some things from me, I'm learning some things from them. I'm not, necessarily threatened by them right now. They're in, kind of a different category there, but I really need to interact with them and grow with them in order to improve, how I see my professional life. And so I encourage people to think about AI right now as a work colleague. It's probably not going to be, the talking point is you versus, AI. It's probably going to be you versus someone who's using the AI.
I think about this just when Boyan was talking, it was like the worst kind of learning environment on the job is when you have a weekly or a monthly check-in with your supervisor and you get a list of things that you should be working on because you haven't been doing them right, or you need to do more of them or less of, It's wrong because of the delay. I mean, it's not good because of the delay, right? But it's also not good to have to confront another person. Much easier to take that correction from a machine. But this goes to something that you brought up earlier today, which is, what happens if we like this better than we like people? So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, the next level challenge. Like, we all talk about our addiction to our devices and social media and all these things right now, when it's still pretty down from that perspective. Imagine what happens when you have chatbots that can talk to you the most friendly way that you can imagine and really get you. like much better than even your most intimate friends or loved ones. So like what kind of society we're going to, this is the her scenario. What kind of issues we're going to have as a society. And my take on that is like with all these other challenges that we have to become much more deliberate about deciding how we're going to live our lives. A lot of things that we kind of take for granted, like friends and community or social structures that we are part of, we cannot take them for granted anymore. We have to be much more deliberate about deciding, taking a day off from your devices, taking time off to decompress, being much more cognizant how much certain devices are encroaching on your family life or your personal life. So we will have to become much more deliberate about things that we so far have been taking for granted.
And in taking them for granted, we've kind of dug ourselves a lot of pretty deep holes in the process. So really need to be mindful about that. One more question for Michael. You talked about workforce being an issue in the roadmap, the Senate document. I read that document and I was like, I don't see much progress. I mean, in terms of deepening that conversation, is that a misreading? Do you think that?
Specifically on workforce or just a roadmap in general?
Specifically on like implications for workers and for training. Do you think they pushed that?
I mean, I think we put out a blog, or I did, and I think that was the one thing I indicated in there. I think we need to determine more, and specifically on ways in which government workforce can be better utilized as far as the AI on the AI side. And I highlighted that lack of probably pointedness that probably should have been within it. But for what the roadmap does not say there, I can say that I think the executive order really did push a lot on this, right? So reading the executive order, the first 45 days is really about getting the right people within the federal government for a lot of the work that needs to happen. And their effort there, and good for them, is they saw a 200% increase in applications for actual federal government AI jobs. And then through that, they're going to be able to do a lot of the groundbreaking work that the previous panel was talking about, just having the necessary foundation here. So yes, I think you're reading that right, where there could have been more there. And I think that gives an opportunity for the House task force that's developing their recommendations right now to see that there might be further need to go in there. But there is some good work happening here as well.
That's great. So we've got a few minutes for questions. Do we have questions? Start in the room. Does anybody have a question? Yeah. So identify yourself and.
I'm Nolan. I'm writing for the Center Square, a news publication. This is for Mr. Richards. I was wondering if you could talk about the fragility or the strength of the supply chain for AI technology. Could recession or other economic downturns disrupt all this fun?
As far as, just supply chain in general about hardware, software, et cetera, or are we talking talents or all the above?
Yeah, hardware, software.
Yeah, look, it's everyone, if you look at it, we don't have enough chips. We don't have enough hardware out there at this point in time. I think we were joking about this a little earlier, actually, that the announcement this morning about Elon Musk taking GPUs and moving them over for his AI just is indicative of kind of the need for hardware out there, right? We don't have enough data centers. We don't have enough energy for those data centers. So there is much a need in the supply chain right now, and there is definitely a want from industry standpoint for that. As far as a downturn there, I don't see it happening anytime soon. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now, and I think you could speak a lot to this, is kind of industry having to do different layers to get to that point, right? So you have, first and foremost, a lot of industry is determining what data they have to actually do a lot of the work in which they need to do internally, and they have to do a calculation around that. They have to actually get that data into a format that can be used within these systems. They have to label it. They have to go through it, and you see this just takes time. So what I'm saying here is that the want and need for this is just going to grow as these industries and companies continue to do all this groundwork. And I don't know if you have anything to add on that front.
I know,
well-
I know he's got something to add. So.
Well, that's a big one, and it's no secret that all of AI development right now is very contingent on the access to NVIDIA hardware in particular. And so you have one oversized company that's really dominating that. And that oversized company, on the other hand, depends on the manufacturing by Taiwan Semiconductor, which is done in Taiwan. And that company is also depending on ASML, which is a Dutch company. So there are three major companies that this whole chain depends on. And if there's any kind of disruption, political, geopolitical, whatnot in that chain, then yes, this whole great thing that we're building with AI could kind of tumble overnight, potentially.
Yes, sir.
Question for Leslie. What's been the student reception to AI? I mean, when I go online and I am interacting with a bot, it depresses me. So what have you seen?
So far, everyone is really receptive to this. We highlighted this at a recent climb convening that we held in Kentucky, invited a lot of the players, a lot of the people that would be using it, a lot of the people who are at the post-secondary level that would be utilizing it and teaching it to their students. And to this point, everyone has been just so excited for the potential. I think that the benefit to capturing this untapped population group for our workforce kind of overshadows some of the fear, overshadows some of the depression, that you're talking about with using a bot. But we have been able to really build into the bot that we're using a lot of support, a lot of encouragement. So this particular, we call this our bot Convo. Convo is very accepting and very encouraging and very loving to this population. So I think that those changes and the actual need really kind of embraces the opportunity for utilizing rather than capitalizing on the fear.
Yeah, and I think that if you follow the developments on this, you also see that we're at the very beginning of this. And already we're starting to see the kinds of improvements in the interface for the user, which makes it, it really makes it quite a pleasant experience rather than one in which people are like, I hate this, or there's no person here for me. It's doing a better and better job of imitating actual human interaction, and so I think that will only improve over time. We're going to see that becoming more fluid, easier, more like the real thing. And I think that, we with AI, every time you make a statement about it, you need to put an asterisk next to it and say, yet, because it's changing so quickly that what feels clunky and not very good right now in a year is going to be completely different from what it is. Got another question over here. Do we have any online, Owen? No? Okay.
Rick Steinheiser, government retired. So I have a question about unintended consequences that nobody has really anticipated when these wonderful services can be developed from AI, LLMs, chatbots, Gen AI, and so on. For example, if high school students can now have a chatbot write their 500-page essay for class, okay? This is creating a tremendous new unanticipated burden on high school teachers. So to go back to, the dark ages, in my high school English, you learn Shakespeare, and then, okay, you had to write and compose a Shakespearean sonnet. All right, so we figured out how to do it, and the rhyme couplet at the end, so bring back dark memories. Now, I don't want to do that. I just tell the chatbot, write me a Shakespearean sonnet, and I got it, and I turn it into the teacher the next day. Problem solved. Unintended consequence,
Does anybody, Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to share. So one other unintended consequence is just the addiction that some of these tools have. So, there's these popular video platforms that have reels that people are watching, and the average American, I think I read, watches on average 40 hours a week because it's being fed exactly what the brain wants, and it's that continued push, back and forth. And so an unintended consequence also changes our attention span and not being able to focus on longer form content. And that's certainly a play. But I think you're getting at this idea of this whole culture is going to change. And so we don't need to rewind the VHS anymore. And so new technologies are going to continue to adapt how we do certain things. And I think that's for the better. But what do you guys think?
I mean, I was just going to play devil's advocate with that a little bit and just say that does that mean that the way in which we learn is going to change? The way in which we interact in our classrooms is going to change. The way we interact with our teachers is it going to change? Instead of us writing a sonnet, are we acting the sonnet out and being part of an immersive technology that we submit that to the teacher for them to take all kind of more, not just your writing, but your also movements and things like that? I understand what you're saying, but I think we're going to have to think about ways in which we're just interacting in this world a little bit differently.
So we were talking a little bit about this earlier. The concern is the cheating, right? People were cheating. Now, why is cheating a bad thing? Why has it been a bad thing in the pre-AI world? Because I taught for a while. Because you're concerned about, is the student absorbing the material? Are they gaining the skills they need as part of the educational process? But what if the AI allows you to skip through all of that process of learning because you now have an external brain that can help you accelerate everything that you're doing? Like, I spent 30 years learning how to write, still learning how to write. I don't necessarily think that it's a virtue to have to spend 30 years to learn how to write. Maybe it's better if people can not have to do that so that they can do more stuff, more other things in the future that I haven't had time to do because I've been editing documents my whole life, that kind of thing. So we can't judge the opportunities of the future against what we experienced in the past. The past had its own limitations. The future will have a different set of limitations. So I'm not so hung up. I'm not so worried about the cheating thing because I think it's going to become an obsolescent or obsolete concept as we all have access to all of the information and all of the skills without having to go through this process. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, sir. This will be the last one, and we'll let people go home.
Well, to certainly follow up on what you've just expressed, seemingly and I want to address it to Bjorn, is that how you pronounce your name? Boyan. With respect to, and again, to follow up, AI seemingly allows you to have a 24/7 tutor at your side. And as a result, what it does is it allows let's say the low performance individuals to really rise themselves up to a really high standard. And then the top performers, it allows them to just accelerate to a place that's just beyond one's comprehension. Yeah. So I would like you to
actually
expound
they've
upon
done studies about it. It seems that it benefits low performers way more right now than top performers. So for top performers, you may get kind of improvements like 5%, 10%, whatnot with the current technologies. But the bottom performers are just become very close to the top performers. So I think it's kind of really leveling playing field for the bottom performers right now more than the top performers. I know in my own work, when I'm doing my own kind of stuff, I rarely use any of these tools. Sometimes just finishing writing up some function for my program or something like that, but very low level stuff that I don't really need much help with. Most of my work pipeline is still pretty much unchanged. But for people who are just starting with this stuff, who have never really done any of these things, these could be huge, game changers.
So and I'll just add to that by saying that the best study that's been done on this so far really affirms all of that. It was a study done on call center workers, and half of them had the chatbot, the other half didn't. And what they found was that the lowest performing workers made the most progress the fastest. They got very close to the top performers. Top performers didn't have much use for it, actually.
Yeah.
It's like, this is second nature to me. I don't need this tool telling me how to do this because I already know how to do this, right? But for people who are starting further back, it allows them to learn much more quickly and gain skills that for whatever reason they never had a chance to get. Most of us pick up these kind of skills as we kind of move through life, but for whatever reason, it allowed these lower skilled workers to move much more quickly, increase their productivity, increase their job satisfaction, increase the customer, improve the customer experience. It was like, it's very rare that we ever see everybody winning, right? Now, people at the top weren't winning that much more, but everybody is winning in this scenario. And I mean, I came into this work quite skeptical of it, but I think I'm seeing sort of on the horizon these amazing opportunities we have to democratize skill and to make and information and to give people who have not had a chance the kind of chance that we would all want for ourselves and for others. So thank the panel very much. Great comments, wonderful work you're all doing. Thank you for joining us here at AEI, and stay tuned for more important and exciting work related to artificial intelligence.